everybody, welcome to Seabug. I should start over here. Yeah, today is World Blender Meetup Day. I did not officially subscribe us for any specific channel because I never know the tech that we have in the lab. But we are hanging out. I'm going to record some stuff and they're going to slot it into the archive for the day. If I told them we would fill up any dead air they have. And yeah, this is the Seattle Blender user group. Here's what we're doing today. First off, my name is Baechler. I've been doing Seabug for almost 9 years now, and it's really fun. I do not use Blender nearly enough these days, but I have a lot more free time next quarter. So I'm going to do a couple projects. I teach here at Lake Washington, mostly in the art department right now, but also in the MMDP. And yeah, I'm using Blender for the start of a comic project right now. And who else is here?
I'm Zuri Greer. I've been going to Seabug for probably a little bit over a year now, and I run the Blender Club here at Lake Washington and Institute of Technology. And yeah, that we lost a bit of attendance because of finals, but I'm hoping that next quarter we get all the Maya students to come in and then I can convert them. Because I tutor for that class and they know me and they like me, and then I'll just be like, haha, remember all that stuff you did? It's going to be better.
Oh, yeah.
So that's good.
I'm Joey. I've been coming here since like 2009 or so. 2009, 2010. Yeah, I'm a hobbyist, I guess.
Alan.
Oh, that's you. I'm Alan Buck. I'm just a hobbyist. I take a few classes here since Oscar told me I could get them for $5. So I'm continuing to do that, but I do this just for fun. I'm retired, so.
I'm Matthew. I've been blendering for about 5 years, and I'm an artist, and I like Blender.
I'm Bob. I've been blendering for probably 5 or 6 years. I use it mainly for a CAD type program.
I've been using Blender for about 3.5 years. I use it mostly for animated projects.
Hey, my name is Sam, so that's my first day here. So I just want to learn something new. That's why.
Cool.
Paul Braggett. I've been coming here for a while, just the hobbyist.
Cool. Well, welcome everyone. I don't know how much stuff we have, but we can watch the stream after things go on. And yeah, I was gonna do a little bit of talk about sculpting and maybe a little bit of hard surface modeling. Sam, you're totally new to Blender, so.
I use a Maya a little, but I don't have I can get around stuff.
Okay, I'm gonna try and show a bit of the basics of sculpting from an intro level, so that you can play along and get your hands dirty. Because I think sculpting is one of the funnest, easiest ways to start Blender, and one of the best ways to get an instant result. The next Seabug is going to be May 6th, I believe. And the reason for that is because it would be weird to have Seabug in 2 weeks. So, I mean, I know we'd all love it, but my wife wouldn't.
More.
All right, yeah, that's and again, it's World Blender Meetup Day, so people all over the internet here are streaming stuff. Cool stuff. All right, so let me talk about Blender stuff. So I've been working on just like a script for a comic in the background of my mind for a while. And I believe in summer I'm going to be teaching a class on comic books here at Lake Washington, which I'm really excited for. A nice summer class for kids and stuff. And so I have this idea for a comic, and the idea is sort of like, sort of just classic starting sci-fi premise of like, oh, there's aliens in space and we're going out there and fighting them. And the idea is centered around this pilot who is trying out a new prototype spacecraft that is wired into a human brain so that it could have faster reflexes beyond anything else. And also, like, it would tap into the survival instincts of that brain. And to get the best possible survival instincts, they like harvested the brain of this mother and like put her on a feedback loop of like a really traumatic pregnancy and childbirth and stuff. And so the plot is like they go into space, he fights the aliens, and that's fine. And then when like he's about to leave the spaceship, like it triggers all of like these memories of you know, her being in the hospital, like her baby getting taken away, and so the spaceship like flips out and takes him to the moon and stuff. And it's like a series of flashbacks. You know, it's that sort of Pixar thing of inanimate object being in love with a human, or you know, having great affection for it. So I tried a couple of spaceships, and I was trying. I wish I had more of my concept art here, but I was trying for something that related to like motherhood, or like should it look like a Gundam that was like female and pregnant or something. And finally I had this great idea, which is what could be a good metaphor for this, and I looked up uterus, and the uterus is kind of like a great sort of spaceship design. So it's actually like designed to look like a uterus, and I thought that was really funny. And so I made some basic concept art. There's a couple more fleshed out versions of this. And I obviously, you know, the uteruses don't end in a big awesome sort of spaceship sword, but this one did. And the first thing I did in Blender is I'm going to try and do some sort of some of the new school sculpting and hard surface modeling ideas where you actually sculpt your hard surface models because they have so much details and actually kind of organic shapes that's just considered a better starting point than going in and doing it. And I've never done a lot of that, and you know, projects are the best way to learn. But this was sort of the first stage, is just blocking in, and this was just an hour of really simple modeling to make sure that this had a profile that I kind of enjoyed, and I wanted you to be able to like have a sense of the scale. And you know, you think a lot about like I try and always have like real world references to stuff while I'm working on this. So for instance, the more I thought about it, it didn't make sense that this actually end in a sphere, because this sort of arm out in space would be like too flimsy in my mind. So instead I was like, well, maybe the ovaries are actually kind of like an energy sphere sort of thing. And then these arms were going to be like assembly line robots. Where it has sort of the Euler-based rotation, where it rotates one way, rotates another, that sort of thing, and then sort of like some sort of grab a claw. And so really this is as far as this project has gotten so far. It's basically what I did last night. And I've done a little bit of sculpting. And so if you guys have never done sculpting, or particularly hard surface modeling sculpting, I thought it would be a fun thing to check out. So first off, you can start by going to, if you have a blank Blender scene, there's just a couple of things you should do to start off with. First off, you're going to switch to sculpt mode, and you're going to hit N to toggle the properties panel, and down here under shading, turn on matte cap, and this will give you a fake material that will make Blender run really nice and fast. And in sculpt mode, if you have the T panel here, this lets you turn on some of the sculpt mode features. Dynamic topology is something that's really, really awesome. They added it a while ago, and you can just see what happens here if I do this just a little bit. As I need geometry, it adds geometry where it's needed. So if I go in here, I say, well, this is going to have more detail. You'll see that the mesh detail increases in the area that I need it, rather than everywhere. if you click into these options, this delta, or this detail attribute, determines how much detail it adds. So if I turn, it's based on screen space pixel ratios. So if you turn this to a lower pixel value, like 5 or 3, like this will be strong enough that it'll start like slowing down the computer. But you'll notice that it added a lot more detail.
You tried to be sneaky about it. It's not
little-
working. You told me not to use that camera.
I did not. You're on film.
Sorry, guys. Sorry.
Nothing to do,
Sorry. So upset. Sorry, guys. My bad.
No problem. Like question, everybody. So I usually start with a pixel detail of like 8, and there's a couple of hotkeys that are really common in sculpting. One is F. The F hotkey will increase and decrease your brush size. So if I want a big brush, it goes like there. Now I got a big brush. And if I hit F like that, I have a smaller brush. You can also use 1 through 9 to change your brush. And there's a couple, and then also shift 1 through 9 chooses the next 10. So like if you have 20 brushes, that gives you 20 hotkeys. And okay. So the first couple brushes you should know about is, I think the snake hook is the first one, which is K. And the snake hook just lets you do lots and lots of instant geometry making. So I can make some sort of, if I were to make a spaceship, maybe it's like something really weird like that to start with. It can be a totally organic shape, which is kind of the fun of spaceships. I think spaceships are like the #1 way that I appreciate abstract art, because you can get like, it can just be circles and squares and cubes, and it looks really good. Let me do 1. The clay strips brush is the next one that I use a lot, and this just sort of adds a strip of geometry where you need it. If you hold shift at any time while you left click to do this, you can smooth. So smoothing, like the most common practice in sculpting is you draw something and then you immediately like smooth out parts that need smoothing. And the other one that you can use is Control to go in the opposite way. So like, let's say I want to like increase this groove here. I can hold Control, and instead this is going to dive inward. Hey. Just to show, because I've done a lot of organic sculpting, but again, I'm trying to do a project where I do hard surface robot type sculpting, which is a very different beast, right? And there's 2 brushes that I use a lot for this. The first one is a custom version of the Scrapes Peaks brush, which hotkey wise is Shift 4. The first thing you're going to want to do with this is actually turn your detail size down to like 3 or 4. And you're also going to turn your strength up to 1. And then on the area plane, you're going to click the lock. And what that does is, if you don't have the lock in, as you use the Scrapes and Peaks brush, when I'm stroking over here, it'll sample from that. And if I stroke from there all the way over to here, it's going to start reconsidering how to do this. We want this to use your first touch to determine the entire thing. So that's what locking the area plane does. And there's two options I use a lot. One is area plane and one is view plane. Area plane is going to change it so that if I click here, it's going to try and find what polygon I clicked on and how can I make it flat relative to that polygon. The view plane is really nice if you're doing something like, so for instance, let me just save this real fast. So for example on this one, I've got this really flat platform and I want it to be something where there's lots of shots where like you're standing here and you can see like the entire ship in the background. And so this whole platform is going to be very anti-organic. It's going to be very flat, like the deck of a boat. And so that would be a great place to use scrapes peaks plus the view plane and do it from this top view. Alright, so we should actually like show this brush eventually. The last thing you're going to do is modify your curve to be very, very like a plateau, like that. And so now, what should happen, I'm going to change this back to area plane, is I can click on something like this, and it'll try and find the entire area where this is flat. And you can see you get this like really nice sort of hardness there. I've noticed that it doesn't always work great with the areas where you're mirroring, so just be careful with like right on your line of symmetry, for instance. See like that, it's not quite finishing it off. But pretty fast you can get something that feels really cool and, I don't know, decently robotic looking.
So, Oscar,
yeah?
when you're working, do you actually save your brush presets? Because when I first learned you could do that, I was all about saving my brush presets, and I made like this master file where I have all these special brushes, and now I find I tend to do it more just per project.
I increasingly try and work off of the defaults for all my software, no matter what, because I've put a lot of love into things like getting the perfect Photoshop. Like you have no idea, like massive libraries of patterns and scripts, actions and brushes, and then like I come to the school and I'm doomed. Or like having all my custom hotkeys. I don't do custom hotkeys anymore for the same reason, except in like very, very rare cases. The specific place where I do custom hotkeys is to make Krita feel like Photoshop, and otherwise I don't care. Whatever software I'm in, I'm gonna drink that software's Kool-Aid. Yeah, no more do I do that. And also, like occasionally, like your computer explodes, then you're doomed. And like it just doesn't feel like a useful amount of. It's not a useful use of my time to do all that and then have it get flushed down the toilet occasionally. So like something like this, I can try view plane perhaps, and see like I knew where I want it to feel flat, so I can rotate to that area. I kind of like this sudden like arrowhead look. So then the next thing you can do is, how do you add like mechanical creases? And for that I think you can use the crease brush. There's actually like a guy who has a sculpt preset done as an add-on, and I tried his brushes and he had a pretty good cutting brush for like cutting just like grooves into stuff. the other thing that's really good to do with this is turn on, go to your stroke and switch it from space to line. And I'll change the spacing to like 5%. But so now, if I do something like that, I can add it like really cleanly. Increase that gouge. That's probably not where I would want that. Yeah. So like this would be the next stage, is going in and like cutting in panels and stuff. And you can also use this for things like if I did want to create more grooves. I would probably, that's the other thing, I made a mistake. Once you're done with your polishing, turn your detail size back down, back to like 8 or 9, because if you're not polishing, usually I don't want to touch that detail size. Ugh. All right, let's go back to clay strips. So the reason I'm doing this, again, like it seems counterintuitive. Why am I doing 3D for a comic book? And it actually does have some precedence. There's a comic book guy that I really love. You guys probably have seen his work actually in things like Mad Magazine. His name is Wally Wood, and he's in the Comic Book Hall of Fame. And he just had like such a great mentality about how to make comics, and in my mind, just how to make content in general. Although he did end up dying like homeless and depressed. You know, he had this saying about comics, which was, never draw anything that you can trace. Never draw anything you can copy. Never copy anything you can trace. Never trace anything that you can Xerox, and never Xerox anything that you can cut out with scissors and paste on. And I think, like, you know, that's like such a good production mentality. It's like, it makes you feel a little dirty, but also it's really cool. That guy shipped so many comics, and there's a reason, which was his outlook on how you have to hit deadlines, if you like. So regarding that, and regarding this stuff, there's this idea in comics that if you're making a model, or if you're going to draw something over and over and over and over and over, don't freehand that. I mean, like, if you're drawing like random aliens in a crowd in Mos Eisley, you know, you're just drawing that alien one time, just freehand that. That's okay. If you're going to draw an X-Wing 30 times, go to Blend Swap, download an X-Wing file, and then you can just position it and draw over it 1,000 times. And so the spaceship is a major sort of focus on this idea I'm working on, right? So it seemed fitting that I should have a model of it, and because I'm going to be drawing it over and over and over, and the spaceship is actually like the main character.
Do you think you're going to draw it every time instead of using like freestyle to render it out?
I think I will, but maybe not. I don't know. I'll probably play with freestyle and see what kind of lines I can get out of it. Or rather, I'm going to do the Wally Wood thing. I'm going to download other people's freestyle files, import my model, and use that. So somebody probably out there has like a perfect sort of anime Gundam mech render for freestyle. And if I pop that in and it works, then sure, I'll do it. I'll change my Scrapes Peaks back. So you have to sort of like plan ahead for doing this Scrapes Peaks stuff. Like, let's see, like right there, I did not like that. And it's because like the first polygon that I clicked on was just not the right angle. that I want. I want this to kind of curve like that. So what I should do is, to make sure this is kind of like flat, I need to gouge that in before I go in, so that I have that angle to work with. And then Shift 4 is that Scrapes Peaks brush.
So is there something that's looking at the average of the faces and determining what the surface?
It's
angle
that
is?
first one that I click on.
So it's the individual face itself.
Yeah, so if I click on this polygon, it's very different from when I click on this polygon. So for instance, this is where it gets tricky, because which of these is going to be like the flat side feeling thing, and I have to like be aware that, like, see that was not the angle I wanted. So I think what I need to do is, I mean, I could switch to the view plane temporarily. There, that's the one. So by switching to view plane, I kind of like made an area where I know I have that polygon facing the way I want. And now in theory, if I click this, I can extrapolate it across all these, hopefully. Now, like, you have to embrace the chiseling aspect of it. There is a good possibility that it will end up being slightly different than your initial planar outlook, and you kind of just go with it, and like, it starts looking pretty good.
You can adjust the offset plane to remove less or more, right?
Yeah, I find that sometimes I like it a little bit negative.
Just so it's not as aggressive or
Yeah. I don't know. It's something where, like, I feel like this actually has a lot of voodoo. So, you know.
And then going back to the tool presets.
Yeah. Spacebar, reset brush. See, like, that was like not what I wanted. So for something like this, I think like the answer is actually to switch back to this, put it to like 8, and actually do like, you know, get this at a starting point that I like more before I go in and do the Scrapes Peaks. So really just think of it like an organic shape for as long as you can. Now, one thing that's important to know about this organic shape is that the second step is actually, in some ways, to totally discard this model. When I said that I'm not doing like traditional hard surface modeling, that's not entirely true. What it is that I'm starting my hard surface model with this as a starting point. So from here, I would eventually, like, I'm never going to use this to bake out normals and stuff, right? I'm using this to create like a starting geometry. And that would be sort of the next stage, is how do I go in and, you know, add a cube. And then I would start doing retopology modeling. So step 1, add a cube. Step 2, delete all verts. So the way that you do this is you switch it to face, and project individual element. And so I can do things like get that vertex right on the place that I want it. So while I hold control, it turns on the magnet, and I can actually turn the magnet on by default. And again, like, I've been teaching drawing classes a lot more than 3D classes lately, so I'm actually like super rusty at my modeling game. But I'm looking forward to spring break. Some, after a hard quarter of working on art projects, I'll relax with some art projects. So then I can. This is going to end up, if I had this more finished, be the basis for like separate sort of interlocking plates. And once I got all this in place, I would start doing hard surface modeling and Boolean stuff. What if I just to show you guys, this is absolutely not a tutorial, just a product pitch. I really like hard ops, so this is what I use for 3D hard surface modeling stuff right now, and it's operations that we can like show the basics of what's happening, but just turned into a lot of miniature hotkeys that make it a lot faster. So a lot of it is Boolean modifiers, and I don't know. It's like $20 or something, but it's really good. Yeah, it's an add-on by a guy named Master Xeon. I bought it, and I've in no way given it the love it deserves. So I bought it to let it sit there.
Does he charge you for an updated version?
No. No, and he's only going to version 1, so pretty soon he'll be done. It's like, this is an example of some of the stuff you can do with it.
Just to be clear, you can't do all this through Blender. It's just
You can do it through Blender. In fact, like, just to show, like, I guess we can look at Booltool. So Booltool is kind of the original version of this, and Booltool comes as an add-on in Blender by default. Boolean modeling is really, really fun. And just to show you like an example of how this stuff works, let's say I have a cube, and I have another cube. I can select this cube and this one, and now with Boolean, with Booltool turned on, Control minus will subtract it. And now inside of this, let's say all these edges were smooth. Control F, shade smooth. There's a couple of other things you can do. So for instance, bevel weight is one that lets us increase and decrease the bevel. And in the edit mode, you can have auto smooth turned on for anything of a certain angle, such as 60. Oh, it does not like that. Oh, I still have project on.
So Blue Tools and Music Performance?
Yeah, Booltool is free also.
It comes with Blender nowadays, right? You just have to turn it on.
Yeah, it's in the add-ons as a default now. And what happens when we do this Booltool? All that happens is, if I look at this mesh, when I hit Control minus, all it's doing is adding a Boolean modifier set to difference. That's just all set up. So all it is a fast shortcut for Booleans that you could set up by default. You can still do it actually the old-fashioned way of, like, get a cube, get another cube, take this one, add a modifier, Boolean, difference, select object, this one, hide this object, or rather, take that object that you're using as your cut mesh, go into its draw properties and turn it into wire. And that's really what you're doing, but that's really kind of slow and obnoxious, right? So with Bool Tool you can do much faster things. So I don't know. You can add something like that. Let's fill this.
What did you do just there that was the...
Oh, this, yeah, that's a fun command. The spin command is, if I have a vert, it's Alt-R, but I just noticed spin. And it goes off of the 3D cursor. It's pretty fun. So you can increase the verts, you can increase the amount of it. So let's say I have something like this. I'm just trying to make like a nice looking shape really fast. Something like that. I can now add a bevel modifier to this. Actually, I'll add auto smooth to this. And when you have auto smooth, you have to start off with shading it. That's not what I want. Shading it smooth. And so auto smooth is going to say, well, these angles on this curving part are, you know, more than 30 degrees. So let's make them smooth. Anything that is stronger than 30 degrees, let's make a hard edge. And then it does a lot of the work of nice normals for me, right? Let me separate this out. I'm going to cancel that previous Boolean modifier. So let's say I have something like this. I can duplicate it. I'm going to delete everything except this face. Inset it. And subtract it. And now I've got this nice. So now I can have like a nice inset and offset. And I could add a cylinder. I'll rotate it 90 degrees. So something like that. Just a cool shape. And then let's subtract it. And
What do you have to have selected when you hit Control minus?
the last mesh is the one that's like the main mesh. So everything, so you select all your paint brushes and then you select your canvas. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And now this is,
If it cares about one thing, it cares about the one thing.
yeah. So if I add a bevel modifier to this, you can see how like the layer stack works. So I can move this to the top layer. And so now, like, what's going on?
bevels the edges you selected?
Yeah, well, what happens is because the bevel happens at the first layer, I can have like smooth edges here. I'm going to change this to 60. That's better. Okay. So yeah, we have nice smooth beveling, and then on the inside we have this. And you might be wondering, why isn't this internal geometry getting affected by the auto smooth? That's because this is actually a hard surface mesh. And again, the auto smooth only adjusts smooth meshes. So I have to go back to this paintbrush mesh and hit Control F, shade smooth. And now it's really nice and clean.
So those rods are in that framework?
Yeah, and you can see like when I for this one I did bool tool, so I just hit Control minus, and similarly we can say like let's actually like have this enter into.
If you move the rods, do the holes automatically move?
Yeah, that's what's nice, is that it's non-destructive in like a short-term amount. So let's add one other mesh. I'm gonna make this smooth, make this auto normal, and we can actually make this an addition mesh. So Control plus made that an addition, and you'll notice that bool tool is just something that makes it really fast. This went hiding, but now these two meshes are attached to each other. And yeah, like I can move this up and down. Something like this artifact, I think that's something where I would just have to fix it with like a bit of making sure there's geometry there for the geometry to work with.
Jay does it.
Jay? Okay. So, no, it's been way too long since I've been had my modeling game on point. So for instance, like I might want something like there. And I can add a little bit of geometry. Actually made it worse.
Probably should have gone on before with beveling.
Can you triangulate the mesh? Would that help?
Probably.
Really, the thing you want to do there is, well, the thing that would fix that the best would be flattening the mesh and then cleaning it up. But that would get rid of brushes. I think you did something.
Oh, I did something.
Also be careful with J, because if you select two like it will go around things. Like there doesn't need to be.
Oh yeah.
That's really nice. Until it does something you didn't want it to.
Just go around for me.
Yeah. I think it's pretty good about measurements.
Nice. It's good enough. The old Oscar motto.
Oh, that was shit hit.
So I don't know. I think bool tool's really fun, and I hope to have more to show on this project pretty soon. I finally have time to like do 3D projects coming up, which I'm very excited for. So another thing I will probably do is, since there's only since there's going to be lots of things going on in this comic, but there's 2 or 3 main characters that you're going to see over and over. That's another area where I might try sculpting it, and I have to think, like, what would Wally Wood do? Is it actually worth sculpting something just to draw it, if I could draw it pretty okay? The goal is always, am I saving time? And am I making it a more efficient production?
I might just go to Blend Swap and download a model.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that.
And then scale that person differently depending on.
Yeah.
Or you could even just use like a Rubify sculpting.
Yep. Like, I have no intention of doing like the full on. Like, I know people who have done like whole comics based on Poser, and I mean, you know, I'm good enough at drawing that that's kind of a waste for me. So I'm not gonna do that. I think mostly I just want an excuse to use 3D. Any questions about sculpting? Hard surface. Just to show that brush one more time. So I think
So
it's
your brush is additive or subtractive? That's what you're doing, right?
I use snake hook for adding.
Are you talking about Boolean?
Booleans or sculpting? So I use snake hook.
It's like grab, it's just grabbing the surface and pulling it out.
Yeah, but snake hook like creates new geometry for you. And actually, if you're careful with it, you can use it for a lot more than just that. So for instance, you can use it for something like here to, I don't know if this is an alien, pull in some eye sockets. It's actually just a really good all-purpose brush, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's good. It basically replaces a graph brush.
I also use clay strips to add geometry slowly.
Is that a mustache or a mouth?
It's gonna be a mouth. And then the brush that I really like using is a modified brush that takes a couple steps. And eventually you just use, you love this brush so much that you do it really easily. Step 1, scrapes peaks. Step 2, lock area plane. Step 3, make your stroke, no, not your stroke, make your curve really, really strong. And step 4, change your dynamic topology setting to really aggressive. Oh, and then step 5, I guess, make your brush strong.
What's the difference between that and the polish?
I feel like polish just doesn't have enough aggression. It doesn't. This is I know, although I haven't used it, I know that the people who like discovered this recipe were specifically trying to duplicate the ZBrush equivalent of the chisel. And it's like chiseling in ZBrush, and
Do you know if there's anything in the works for an equivalent of like the Z remesher? I know we have a remesh modifier.
I do actually. There's a guy who did a talk yesterday on the World Blender Meetup stream, and he recommended a software called Instant Meshes. I think this is it. Yeah, it's these guys.
Yeah, that was a proof of concept kind of thing.
Let me see. But he showed it in action, and it did a really good job of remeshing.
It's been such a game changer when that was, especially when they updated it for our 7 with no spire.
You have to deal with meshes that have 500,000 vertices and more, and you want to get a quad base.
Oh, so it's a plugin for Blender.
No, it's like a separate app.
Oh.
Yeah, it's these guys. IGL that.
There should be a demo version somewhere, Oscar. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, I used
Yeah.
it.
You can paint
Is it this
contours
one?
and then it will infer
Yeah, I have it right here. Make fun.
Is this what I want?
Yeah, that one's it.
Let's see what's in there. Let's explore together.
Are these guys releasing this for free, or is this the...
Yeah. I don't know if it's open source, but it is free.
You're on the GitHub page, right?
Yeah. Is that bad?
That's open source, right?
Okay. Does it have a? It's gonna be in resources. Source?
Is there a binary folder? Is there a bin?
No. Do I have to build this?
No.
So scared of building. I've tried multiple times, and like I think that's where.
Go back to the GitHub page, Oscar.
Oh.
Scroll down. There should be a field called pre-built binaries, pre-compiled binaries. I just pick the.
Ah, there we are.
Whatever you want. Yeah.
Is it by default?
So the other day I spent like half an hour retopologizing a wrong. And I was like, this would be the perfect thing.
Don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, like, if it's a human face that you're gonna have as like a main character, retopologize it. If it's a rock, just auto do it.
Well, it depends if it's geometry.
All right. So let's see what happens if we give it. Let's just snake hook this a bunch and export it. See what it gives me.
Get that Gundam forehead thing going on.
This sticks all straight to the Gundam models. Have you ever painted Gundam models?
I'll go there for this.
They were awesome.
Yeah, it was cool. Place that sold them, like kicks or whatnot, closed down.
Oh, by the way,
I don't know if there's one.
feel about the
You can buy the Umaga Maya, but that's kind of a tourist trap. Yeah,
when I was a kid,
for food at least, I mean.
growing up in Yakima, you could only get Gundam models on the internet. Alright, there's good enough, right? You'd all believe this is an alien mesh. Let's try exporting it. Export. Obja.
Yeah, OBJ. We're from OBJ.
It's pronounced Obja.
Every time I look at my camera now, that's all I can think of.
It did. Alright.
So you can paint
Where did you export it to?
Just my desktop.
so under the orientation field, you can just click solve. And then it paints it.
Yeah.
Now you can pay additional contours to get nice mesh flow around like the horns and stuff. So it should be a little tool to.
Put under advanced.
No.
Just make a little
Oh, brush. Got your Bicularis oris.
Forehead use murder.
Alright, you gotta switch back to rotate, it looks like. There, where'd my brush go? There it is. This is where drawing is handy. It's really something that, yeah. I don't know. That looks pretty good, right?
You make that a shell like into a mask?
Yeah, there's probably a way to mirror this, huh?
I don't know if there is. It's pretty, like it's, it comes out of the research community, so they don't
Yeah.
always have
I mean,
to
my
update.
solution would be to export the the unmirrored version, and then save the version you like. Alright, let's export this mesh.
You have to extract the mesh first. That's not the best mesh.
Change the density.
Yeah, it looks like there's a slider of some sort.
Where is it?
Right. Right there. And see if extract mesh again.
Oh yeah, see? And that starts getting pretty good edge loops. Let's try wonder if I can do a full circle. Yeah, it's slowly getting some edge flow. I don't know if it does circles totally, but certainly does good enough for business work, and I don't know. I like it. Alright, so that's some basics of sculpting, and I guess hard surface sculpting. One last time, because it's such an important recipe. It's the only if I were to save a brush in Blender, this would be the only one I did. Scraped peaks, area plane, smooth stroke, or no, change the curve, dynamic topology of like 3. And then sculpt away.
Will that save to a STL file or 3D print?
You can
As a sculpture, probably not, because it's going to have lots of weird errors, I think.
But if you were to remesh it in some way, I'm sure you could, no problem, send it over to an STL.
Is
And
that 3D toolbox? Will that find the
Yeah, the 3D print toolkit.
Well, so one thing that's really cool that Oscar hasn't shown you just yet, which it's actually the way we had to do the sculpting before, is with the multi-res modifier. So Dynatopo is really awesome for really just building up form really quickly, and so you don't have to start with a base mesh. But it kind of runs a little bit slow and adds way more polygons than are necessary in many areas. So once you've got your base form, if you retopologize or remesh in the program we were just looking at, then you bring it back, and instead of using dynamic topology, you can use the multi-res modifier.
Yeah.
And you get some really awesome baking options with that, and that could be much more easily transferred to STL.
Yeah. So just to show the multi-res modifier.
You want to bring in the head thing that you remeshed?
Sure.
Do like a full pipeline.
The thing with multi-res, you can't actually change the topology. Like with Dynatopo,
Yeah.
you can punch a hole through something.
Right.
Yeah, so like you have to make sure that like you're not adding any more alien horns. You've got them kind of in the space you want. You're switching over to painting in the wrinkles and skin texture.
last time I checked, you had to kind of go to edit mode.
Nice
to
bit.
get small holes.
Yeah, it's kind of my experience too. In ZBrush, the Dynamesh, will punch a hole through, it's fine, but it's something that, it's a little harder. Totally possible.
What do you mean?
To punch a hole in your sculpt without going into edit mode?
Oh well, let me export.
What?
That's a paid portion.
I guess so.
You have to put the dot. You have to put in dot obj or dot
Ah.
after it.
I love that
OBG.
half the tools in the 3D industry are just like some guy made it, like Crazy Bump. It's like You go to like, oh, I want to buy a license. It's like, oh yeah, email me at Ryan at Crazy Bump. You know, it's not like contact or support. It's like Ryan at Crazy Bump, but it's just some guys.
One guy.
Same with X normal. Same with all these things. And then they're not held to any professional standards. You get software like Crazy Bump when your license expires. It says puny human buy a new license.
Yeah, I mean like,
What is that?
Indu and Didu is my favorite. Like, there was just one day on CG Talk where some guy was like, "Hey, I made this giant Photoshop action. It's pretty cool." And then like it got front paged, and then it was like, "Wow, everyone's using this for all their normals now. Maybe I should actually make a software company." And now it's like this giant cool shell on top of what is essentially just a nice Photoshop action.
Have you played with YouTube?
Yeah.
Although, man, it manages stuff so well, like so many layers, like it blows my mind.
Yep. Alright. So here's my finished alien mesh. I think the first thing you would want to do after this is, I mean, I would probably, if I was being smart, try and make this have a nice center line across the whole head, but whatever. Let's just go in and multi-res it. Multi-res! So the multi-res modifier, instead of adding geometry where you need it, which is what's really cool about dynamic topology, instead multi-res is like a subdivision modifier, but with smoothing. So I can hit subdivide, and got one layer, and then I've got another. Now when I go into like, I'll go to like layer, whatever. So let's add some texture maybe. So I do not want dyne topo on this, but I could have perhaps a new texture, and let's make it magic. I like switching it to stencil, and when you have it on stencil, right click moves your stencil around. Shift right click increases or decreases your stencil.
You mean change the scale?
Yeah. I don't know how, but sometimes I'm able to get it to lock. I have no idea why. It's cool though. And control is rotate. And I think I want this to also I think there's a way I can make it repeat. Oh no. Well, if not, then just stay right here. Now I can go in and start. Start adding some bumps to this guy. Maybe not that much. Voronoi are really fun texture to work with. And so this is going to have, if you click into it, if I tab into it, you'll notice that it's got all this cool detail, but it's also saving the mesh at the lowest level. So it's a much cleaner mesh. So oftentimes, like, you'll get this to be the mesh that you're actually using in a game or a movie, and then you just do all your texturing on top of that, and you're never making more mesh data after that.
So the main downside, obviously, from this versus dyne topo is, as you mentioned, you can't really change major forms of this.
Yeah, like if I go in with Snakehook now and I try to add like
We can try to add the creases, yeah.
yeah, let's try and add another horn.
Yeah, you're gonna
At a certain point, it's just gonna like
get artifacts.
yeah, it's kind of a, I mean, the best process is to do a little bit, to start with Dynatopo when you're done remesh, and then,
Well, actually,
then
that
hop
works.
over multi-res.
Or just start with a basic human.
Or start with.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just
If you're not modeling it,
Yeah, yeah.
cool.
yeah, no, start with the mesh as close as you can get it.
Because doing it this way, assuming that you don't push around massive forms like he's just done here, you're going to get far less artifacting, and then it won't freak out when you try to say that it's STL or use it in your other software.
And like you always will need to do a little bit of cleanup. Like this is leftovers from that export, and that would be something I would normally like make nice and pretty before I went and then multi-resed. All right, should we take a break? And,
So will that STL?
this will probably never print because of this artifact, but
You can, yeah, Blender can export it as an SDF.
yeah,
The
File
software
export.
cannot correctly import it. Just
SDF.
export it as an SDF.
whether that has the mesh data or not depends on probably if you flatten this multi-res modifier.
The export options has apply modifiers checked by default.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, export
At
STL.
least for OBJs.
Yeah, so apply modifiers to determine if you want that multi-res or not. Alright, yeah, let's take a break and be back in a bit.